This cutaway perspective view shows the overall scope of the project, 2 rooms connected by a hallway. Now we can zoom in to see a plan view of the Japanese space. Here's the cutaway elevation view of the entire space, now focusing on the Japanese room to the right. A view through the entry to the Japanese space. And a perspective view showing the furniture and alcove. This video will cover the assembly of the long bench of the set of 3 benches in the Japanese room. All 3 of the benches, as well as most of the interior woodwork in that room, are to be done in Avodire, which is a wood from Africa. More specifically in Angola, Benin, Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ivory Coast, Equatorial Guinea, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Uganda. It's a stable wood with a very good strength to weight ratio and similar in working properties to the true mahoganies, and in fact is somewhat related to them. Another name for it in fact is blonde mahogany. While Avodire shares a similar color to yellow cedar and Port Orford cedar, it's twice as hard, so I think it's a better choice for a room like this one where there's probably going to be more wear and tear than might be seen in, say, a tea house. In this section I'm putting the cross pieces to the rails. Most of the cross pieces are held with a simple centered tenon, and they do most of the work of supporting the seat boards in the bench. Every other piece, however, is like the one I'm putting in right here, is twinned tenoned, and the tenons go through the other side, so these serve as a form of a tie beam. One of the funny characteristics of Avodire is it has a surface stickiness, which means that when 2 pieces of Avodire are fitted to one another, they don't slide by one another very easily. They tend to get stuck to one another. So this makes the joints, which I fit quite tightly, seem even more tight in the video and are quite difficult to draw together. So it looks as if they're too tight and I might split the rails, but that is not the case. It's just the surface qualities of the wood make it difficult to slide together the various connections. And what you're seeing here is in fact final assembly. I am not trial fitting these connections together. They have all been trial fitted individually previously, but I put the joints together dry like this, and then for those connections that are wedged, to lock them I will only apply the glue just to the wedges. Maybe a more conventional approach would be to fit the mortise and tenons so that there's enough space in the joint to apply glue. I've decided why not take that space out, fill it just with the wood, in other words make a tight joint, and then glue the part that forms the mechanical shape, i.e. a dovetail, to connect the parts together. So that's what I'm doing on this project. To me, a well-fitted mortise and tenon joint doesn't just fall together or slide together easily. It requires some force, not too much force, but some force, either by using a clamp, as you see in this picture, or with mallet work to bring together. There should be a little bit of interference when you're fitting without glue. If you're fitting with glue, then there needs to be enough space for that glue to fit in between the 2 parts. The seat of the bench is comprised of 3 boards, and after I fitted most of the cross pieces, save for the end ones, I can start fitting the boards one by one. The one I'm just fitting here has a tongue along its long edge and a tongue at each end to engage with the outer frame parts. The middle board, which I'm fitting right now, has tongues only on the end and does not tongue and groove to either side flanking board. I will just space it about 1/8 of an inch apart from those boards. Here I'm working to draw the end rails along with the floorboard assembly in tight to the one long rail. The last step is the most difficult, and that is connecting the remaining long rail to all of the mortise and tenon joints in the rest of the bench and then drawing it tight together. While this step is difficult and requires a lot of work, it's vastly simpler than if I were trying to glue all of the connections and connect the same rail. So one of the advantages to not using glue is a much more relaxed assembly process. Takes a while, but we're starting to get there. On to the last step, namely gluing in wedges. So I apply a little bit of glue to both sides of the part that will be flared. Next step is to trim the tenons. The router cut leaves the tenon proud about 1/100 of an inch, and I take the last bit off using a Kote-nomi or crank neck chisel. Here I'm pre-scoring with a knife the portions of the frame that will be chamfered, which I do initially with the router. A machine cut surface, especially with a router, is never going to be perfectly clean, so we finish off with a chamfer plane. Now onto the support legs. Here I'm using a hammer to pre-compress the grain on the tenons. This is to aid in the fit. Makes it just a little easier to get together while still making for a tight fit. The other advantage with pre-compression is once the joint's assembled and a little bit of glue goes in there where the wedges are, the moisture from the glue is taken by the compressed grain, causing it to swell and make the fit ever tighter. I use a bandsaw to cut the slits or kerfs for the wedges. Two legs are connected to one another by a pair of stretchers, the upper one of which is blind tenon. For those joints I use a little bit of glue. A pair of clamps keeps everything in just the right place so that when I fit the leg assembly into the frame, I don't have to worry about any of the joints separating or getting damaged. onto leg set number 2. In the background to the right, you can see on the table saw the other 2 benches for this project, which have already been assembled. Wedging the leg tenons is much the same procedure as you saw with the cross pieces. Sometimes the portion of the tenon to be wedged needs to be coaxed sideways a little to make room to put glue in the kerf. When I hammer in the wedges, it's one of those, what David Pye called workmanship of risk sort of situations. I don't use any padding to protect the surrounding wood. I just concentrate extra hard and to take care to hit the top of the wedge in a clean line so you don't miss or break the wedge. Exposed through tenons are what one might call a loud design detail. So by using wedges that are of the same wood as opposed to what's more usual using a contrasting wood means the finished appearance will be on the quieter side. Prior to using a router to trim off the exposed tenon ends, I use a flush cutting saw to trim the wedges. Admittedly, this chisel could be sharper. It did the job though, and this isn't the final touch of a tool on the surface anyhow. After the trimming by chisel, I hit the same locations with Kanna and try and get the smoothest finish I can. This is still yet to receive final planing, but I leave that for the future. The last remaining connections to attend to are the lower stretchers on the leg sets These are through tenon with a protruding tenon end. At this point the tenon ends are extra long, and as you'll see will be trimmed after the wedges are fitted. Here I'm using a skew chisel, or what the Japanese called an isuka nomi, to chamfer the ends of the tenon before I finish planing them. I'll set these aside for a few more weeks while I concentrate on other parts of the project. Thanks for watching.